I mean, they did. That's one. Thank you, Chris. Okay.
Do we have a copy of the copies?
Hey, Chris.
Chris?
If we want copiers, do I just need to call Terry or? Okay. Thank you.
She's eating her $37.
It's really good, isn't it?
I just want to know how you can explain that to you. Good answer.
Okay.
Good answer.
Yes.
I wouldn't have known.
My first question always has been, are you safe while you're hurt? Of course, I didn't have to do that too often, but still. We had Highway 42 shut down and 17 last Friday because of ice. They had 30 plus cars off the road just from the intersection of 42 and 54 going past the state park. That's a stretch of maybe 3 miles. It just, but the road is like, the hills.
Right.
Yep. And as some people finally found out, you don't drive on ice. You skate.
Yeah.
That's why when they said stay home, stay home. That's what.
You know what? If we can't make it to the store today or next week,
Do that.
it's fine. We can do that. You know?
Like a big pot of spaghetti or soup. You said. There isn't a whole lot as far as history in that.
No, it really isn't.
The thing that gets me is, and having taught, I taught kindergarten and first grade. We do a lot of social studies. The thing is, it's built into the reading material. We used to have social studies books, but I'm now trying to find time to teach social studies on lower levels, with the emphasis being reading and math. It's almost to the point. But like in kindergarten, knowledge of, and this is on, even just going down the list here, they've left a lot of stuff blank that I know we did.
And like you were saying, it may be in a different strand, not necessarily history. Maybe it's not. You're a lot more familiar with it than any of us, so you would know probably.
I think there's a lot of things that teachers do.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily.
Yeah. But again, a lot of it is, and this is where the discrepancy comes in. A lot of teachers do a lot of stuff, but since it's not being tested, it varies so much from school to school. So when you get a kid from this school coming to your school, and you're saying, well, have you done this? And I go, nope, never heard of it. So, and the impact then does come down as they go further up to grade levels they don't have the background information presented to them. So, I mean, I like this in 3G. I like the statement they put in here on knowledge of contributions of non-Missourians. I like the statement where it says, describe the contributions of non-Missourians typically studied in K-4 programs. Example given, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. You know. But that's a summative statement for me in grade 1. And the only objective in 3rd grade on history is Martin Luther King Jr. contribution.
Probably first grade.
We did 1st grade because when we did the observations of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we spend, believe it or not, we spend a week. I mean, not full force, but the effects of it. And then it's reinforced again in the next grade, and you touch on it, and you touch on it. So
what's the goal? Are we supposed to get more than just that? Or are we just supposed to say that's all they have to know and move on? I'm confused.
What we're doing
Yes,
now.
we can decide
Yeah, we
either.
can
We
decide
recommend.
either way.
We can recommend
and how
either of them.
consistent do we want it to follow through? And I remember the times, and it had to deal with curriculum, and schools set up their curriculums that way. At what point is a concept introduced? At what point is it reinforced? At what point is it maintained? At what point is it, introduced, reinforced, mastered, maintained? That's how we used to have to write all that stuff. So it gets quite involved here, and that's where the DOKs come in too. And your DOKs, twos are basically being able to identify it and explain it in simple ways. So, and even some of the DOKs I disagree with, but that's neither here nor there. But there is a lot of stuff done that doesn't show up in here.
Or you think it's done,
Yeah. So, and then, and like Craig said, you take a look at that strand right there. I mean, kindergarten, yeah, you're doing history. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and in the 4th grade and 5th grade, they're getting slammed with all of the information. So if you can somehow take some of that 4th grade and filter it down into 3 and 2 to make it fit with region and state, and you don't have to worry about shoving all that information in. And then the weird part again is, there's this thing that always, again, you can look at it, 5th and 8th grade almost mirror themselves, except for the terminology of the verbs. In 5th grade, identify, in 8th grade, interpret, but the rest of it is the same. But there's nothing in 6th and 7th grade.
But don't you think, there's a big difference between saying this happened on this date in terms of identifying or, naming
Yeah, I know.
versus why did this happen, what perspectives are represented here.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's a pretty big difference.
But I think you can do some of that already
I agree.
in those
I'm all
4th
for
and 5th
that
grade.
identify one.
Identify. Here it is. And that's what
There
kids
are
do.
2 of them in there, we're going to start.
Yes.
Interpret, though, to me is almost vague.
Yeah, it is.
To me, as an outsider, I don't know.
If somebody says
Interpret,
explain.
to me, that leaves it like, how do you interpret it? It should be factually interpreted of why something happened, not just what do you think.
Well, see, a lot of times.
That's how that comes up.
But my experience dictates my interpretation.
Yes, so then you're going to have 28 different experiences answering that, and I think that gets very broad.
So
I don't
again-
like interpret as much as identify, I guess.
And what I'm saying is this, and I've said this for years too, what I'm saying is, can't we load some of the basic information in here and here, take some of that, bring it down into here, and then get into the higher levels of that? You know, and then everybody has the same information, not interpretation. I used to hate poetry. I like poetry, but I hated it when a teacher said, here's the poem, give me your interpretation of it. And if my interpretation didn't agree with the teacher's interpretation, I was cooked.
Subjective on-
You know, so
I
it's
would
like,
say it's very subjective.
what did you get out of this? Nothing.
And now all kids do is Googling.
Mhm.
So you need to, yeah, but.
So,
I
again,
felt like in Marshville, third grade, we did a lot of states. You were saying that was usually fourth, now maybe this has changed. My youngest is in high school, so maybe that has changed in the last few years, but third grade was the big field trip to the Capitol.
not anymore. See, when I started teaching, fifth grade was the states and the regions and the capital trip.
Yeah, it's just
Now it's
third.
fourth grade.
No, it's third. I don't
Now
know if it is
it's
still
now it's part of
Marshville, but-
now it's part of third. But if you're looking at this stuff is outdated in the fact that it doesn't even reflect what the classrooms are doing.
Our district doesn't even have it.
See,
And we don't even know anymore, we're
Okay.
so large.
and it also depends. Is it
400 kids up to the Capitol.
okay? We're going to need about 10 school buses.
Well, we staggered the days they went. I don't think we had, I mean, Marshall this week, those are good things. Then again, I've been out of elementary for a few years, but that was third grade, fifth grade was systems of government. They were learning all the branches and the
Mhm.
functions of branches, so they were pretty much past just learning to state at that point.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I think third is a little more, so this kind of.
I mean, you can push some of that down there.
Don't you think, I mean, like, you talking about the DOKs, the college things,
Mhm.
I was looking at, there's very few that require, like, this next we talk about the depth of knowledge through the short-term strategic thinking. Even when you're getting up in fourth and fifth grade, there's very few requirements beyond just a recognizing information, and then all of a sudden we're going to step into the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 expected of most stuff.
And they have to interpret.
Okay, I'm like, in kindergarten, can you, I mean, I was assuming, well, kindergarten teachers, if no other time of the year, at President's Day week, don't they talk about famous presidents at least? I mean, aren't they introducing the first president? I mean, but that's not there.
We do it preschool.
First grade.
I mean.
Yeah, it's first
I'm
grade.
just like, there's not, I mean, if you don't repeat the same information over and over and over and over again, year after year after year, then it can get lost.
And this is what I was talking about, building a base of knowledge. And in that whole system there, I have not seen building a base of knowledge. Why? And the third strand here is the perfect one. It shows we got nothing, and then bam, all there is. So if I would really like to see some of that fourth grade and fifth grade push down and make it age appropriate. The concept, and again, we're looking at learning stages. If you make the concepts concrete learning, and then, I mean, you can sneak some, what's the other term I'm looking for? Concrete versus abstract. You can sneak some abstract stuff in there, but don't load it so heavily with abstract concepts that you lose the kids. And that's one thing I like about this committee. We agreed, learner appropriate. So, but a lot of that stuff right there, you can scoot down and make it age appropriate and work it that way. If you can't figure it out, I'm a history buff. You know, so it's.
But you gotta be careful.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is that this is not, it looks systematic to us because we're sitting here looking at it. But just because something is taught once in grade 1 and then taught again in grade 2, and taught again in grade 3, there's still a year in between each of those times. And so if it's done just in isolation and not within any sort of framework, then it's completely done in isolation and it's one ear, it's in one ear and out the other. And so like even as you're looking, like to me, even as I'm looking through this, one thing I noticed is fourth grade, they start talking about the Civil War. They talk about Missouri's role in the Civil War, but we haven't talked about the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about Missouri's role in the Civil War, but have never actually talked about the Civil War. And to me, there does seem, I understand why you would talk about it in just the framework of Missouri's history, but it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse in some way. We want to show Missouri's role as something that we haven't actually talked about. And you know, and so I think you've got to be careful just to say, well, we think they can do it, and we think that, and then it ends up being something in isolation. And I'll push back a little bit. I think there does need to be some background knowledge, but I would want to be very careful assuming that we're ever gonna be able to give kids all the background knowledge as opposed to teaching them some of those deeper, higher level thinking skills. And there's a difference. I would rather my kids start to practice how to think rather than only get their head filled with facts.
I agree.
And so at some point there's a balance there, so I think we gotta make sure we're keeping that balance in mind.
And that's what I'm getting at too. Maybe I didn't express it that way. How are facts remembered? Just even simple facts.
So use and apply that they can use short term.
Exactly. So if that process is somewhere worked in there, you know, why not put dimension of Civil War in grade 3? And just, you know, what's the civil, and you can ask the students as simple as what's
my
the Civil
question
War?
the other way around, which is why are we putting it in grade 3? Is it fitting within something bigger, or are we just doing it because we feel like they can't understand it?
Okay, what are we doing in grade 4 right now when it comes to U.S. history?
It's a great question.
Well, right now,
I'm just kidding.
it's Missouri's role in national history right now.
Okay, right. I remember going to the first MMAT meeting when they were discussing that, and the guy says, I don't know what different grade levels around the state of Missouri are teaching, but I do know we teach American history in 5th grade. That was the chairperson from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. That was his opening statement of that. And that was back when the MMAT was around. So if you're looking at that, I know we have to be careful what we move, and if we move it, does it have a purpose for moving it? I agree fully with that.
So Kathy, when you look at, when you got your first broad look, what were you thinking as you were
You mean today or?
Yeah, today.
Just well, I think there are some things missing in K1 and 2. You know, I probably bring a different perspective from weighing heavier on facts and information, because, you know, working every day with kids who have tools really at their fingertips in school to access the facts and information, I think it's important. But I also think the why it's important is important. And so to me, the wrestling with the thinking and looking at things through a historical perspective at what was happening during the time and looking at different perspectives are important rather than just leaving it with the facts and information. I like that historical figures are introduced in 1st grade, kind of through that national perspective. But I think it's pretty rough, you know, having just worked a lot with KN1, with the contributions. I think they can do facts and information. They can recognize faces in paintings and photographs and label them as, you know, the first president or the 16th president. But I think contributions are harder. And so to me, I can see things like that spiraling to, you know, we were just working on summer school curriculum for social studies yesterday. So we spiraled back to 3rd grade, and they have a week in the summer where they do a document-based question activity through a week, you know, what were the contributions of George Washington, and then 5th grade is doing Abraham Lincoln for the summer, because that idea of looking at sources from that time and looking at maps and looking at movement of peoples and so what was the greater impact of this person beyond just the things they did? How did what they do influence other people and influence other events? And so, you know, I would like to see some of that, which is where I see that analyzed part of it, that it's more than, so, you know, why? Because I think we misrepresent a lot of history. So, you know, I think it's important for kids to read actual documents and talk about them and think about them.
Like, would you elaborate on like maybe something that you've seen where history has been misrepresented? Like something, because I agree with you, I'm just trying to, I don't see it in the classroom.
Well, I think the notion that, I mean, you know, like Abraham Lincoln's credited with abolishing slavery. That really was wasn't the intent to start with. You know, and not that that's a bad or a good thing.
It was the
It's
end
just
result.
the facts.
Yeah,
It's
the
just
end
that
result
when
happened,
you study
right.
the facts, it's really didn't happen that way. Although we teach it a lot that way. And I'm not knocking on Abraham Lincoln for sure. But I guess when I think of our primary purpose for social studies, and I think of my own 4 children, when I want them to develop skills both at home and at school, where when they read the newspaper and it says this, that they're fact checking, that represents someone's opinion, and the way that you develop your own opinion is by looking at lots of different perspectives and facts and saying, well, based on my experience and what I know, here's how I think. That's what I want for my kids.
Right.
Being able to evaluate the information that you're presented with. And I think that's one of the things, I hate to say it, that skill is not being reinforced that much. When I was going to college, they were talking about by the year so-and-so, information is going to be this, by the year so-and-so, information is 5 times that, 10 times that. Our kids, your second grader, at the fingertip, my first grade grandson and granddaughter, at the fingertip of that computer, they have a huge amount of information.
But just because it's different doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly.
And that's what social studies is the difference. And so what skills do you help them develop to look at print, not to tell them, what to think when they look at it, but tell them but to help develop a thinking process to use that weighs evidence. I don't know. And I think that, certainly developmentally, middle school and high school are getting more in that range, but our kids have access to things they didn't have access to in 1993.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Nowadays,
so how do
yes.
you,
Oh, my gosh.
so how do you begin to, there are current events that second graders can look at and say, well, this person remembers it this way, and this person remembers it this way. Why is that?
And see, this is one of the things too, we have thrown old encyclopedias away. It would be amazing, and I've told kids this, take a 1950s and 60s set of encyclopedia and look at the way people were thinking back in those days and what their knowledge base was then, and then compare to the information that's out there. The very simple example of space travel. That's just mind blowing when you think about it. I guess they had then, or when you're talking about first African American president, back in the 50s and 60s, nobody thought about that because that was not even on the horizon. Now as a nation, we've gotten to that point. Women in Congress, more women in Congress. The roles have changed so much. So how do you put that in here when it talks about knowledge of Missourians? I look at some of the lists here now. I got to be honest, Mary Easton Sibley or Sibley. Okay, so, George Washington Carver and there's some excellent people in here. Mark Twain, Harriet Truman, when we're talking about presidents. There are Missourians that don't know who Harriet Truman is. That's.
Is he listed in here?
He's listed in,
I missed
B.
it. Oh,
B.
B. I missed one of those.
And that's in grade 4.
Gotcha.
Donna Sargent is in there. But when you look at stuff like this, and again we're talking knowledge base, what was the contribution of those people? What is the simple question is, what was Harriet Truman noted for? Dropping bombs. He was the one that had to make the decision. And again, you can get into a whole lot of stuff again. And when we're talking about Abraham Lincoln, when his goal was not to eliminate slavery, but when you look at the Emancipation Proclamation, what did it in effect do? It started the ball rolling to get to that point. So.
I think it's important to keep in there that he was vehemently against slavery.
Yeah.
And that was one of the goals he did not, he protected the escaped slave, he did a lot of things. That, you know, I just think it's important not to be taking some of this from what he did. He wanted to keep the Union together.
Right.
But he was against slavery.
He was against slavery.
Earlier, before he ever ran for president, he hated slavery and wanted to see it end. So I would be careful of taking that away from him.
Exactly, and here's the other thing, if you think about it, you know, you're looking at the Constitution. A lot of people don't even make that connection. You have people that have signed the Constitution who were slave owners. So how can you actually sign a piece of paper that says all men are created equal, but yet you have what? A system of slavery. And the simple answer to that has to be that was an accepted way of life back in those days.
That's looking through a historical perspective.
Exactly.
But you have to teach the concept of the times.
Yes, yes.
They weren't doing anything wrong, but I do believe that they thought eventually freedom would come to them, or they wouldn't have said that, because there are still countries that have slaves today.
Oh, no.
So before we really make America look bad for doing that, we shed our own blood to free them. It took time.
But I also think we gotta change it, just because there's also, when we say we, we're using this word as though that we includes everybody, and I would be very careful with the word we, because there were people that either were against slavery or were actually slaves that may not have agreed with things like we. So I think part of this is that we, when I say we, I mean we have to be careful in terms of what perspectives we're even, that we're not choosing just one or two perspectives, because when people talk about this, we are missing that that the slave also would have had a perspective on some of these things as well, and there may even been freed slaves. I mean, there's lots of different perspectives, or even when you talk about the Constitution, you talk about those things. Just that they owned slaves, it was also that the only people who even got to vote were men who owned property. So